Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Ka. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our group learning program, and we're in chapter 19 of our book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This chapter is titled, The Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death. This is where you learn a bit about the life story of the Buddha and what motivated him to take this journey to get to enlightenment, and also some guidance on how to deal with sickness, aging, and death, because oftentimes this is a real challenging time for you in your life when you're experiencing sickness, aging, and death, or the people around you are experiencing sickness, aging, and death. So I'm going to guide you in a breathing mindfulness meditation session to get us started, and then I'm going to move into a talk helping you to understand the life story of the Buddha in sickness, aging, and death, and how this really impacts you and how you can overcome it. So welcome to all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly. If you'd like to join for meditation, I start with chanting to ease us into the meditation. This is just to help ease the mind into the meditation. This isn't a rite or ritual or a ceremony or worship or prayer or anything like that. It just helps you to get more benefit out of the meditation itself. Then I'm going to provide some guidance during the meditation to be able to help instruct you and guide you in the meditation as we get started. Then there's going to be a period of time where it's just quiet and we're all meditating together, and we'll come out of the meditation with some more chanting. And that's where I'll start today's talk on chapter 19, The Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death. So if you'd like to take a position, either seated, lying, or standing, these tend to work really well with online learning. Of course, there's the walking position as well, that you're welcome to do that if you like, but oftentimes it doesn't really work so well with online learning. So as you take your position, get comfortable with the body, and if you'd like to join along in the chants, you're more than welcome to, and afterwards I'll come back in with some guidance on the meditation. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Bhutang Bhagavanang Abhivateyami Sawakato Bhagavata Tammo Dhammang namasami Supatipano Bhagavato Sāvaka Saṅgho Saṅghang namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno สกาโตโรกาวิตูอนุเตโรปุริสาดามาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภาควาติ Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, in the upper body erect. Just close the eyes and breathe in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath, a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathing gradually through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thoughts, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมะคะวาพุทธังมะคะวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมะคะวะตาอะธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสภะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิจาจารณังสัมมุโนสคาโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรปุริสาธัมมาสติสัตตาตวามนุสนังพุทโธภะคะวะติ Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation. Once again, welcome to all of you. Nice to see everyone in class today, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Welcome to our class. As I mentioned at the beginning of our class, today's topic is Chapter 19. This is titled The Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death. This is where you learn a bit about the life story of the Buddha and what motivated him in his journey to enlightenment. And the reason why this is actually helpful is that there are certain things that the Buddha discovered in his journey to enlightenment that are actually going to be helpful for you in your journey to enlightenment. So as you learn about his life story and what it took for him to get to enlightenment, there are certain lessons learned that you can gain and certain insight that you can gain from his life. Sometimes students might think, David, you have so much respect and gratitude and appreciation for the Buddha. How could you put his life story as chapter 19 in the book? Shouldn't that be like up towards the beginning? Well, yes, the answer is the reason why his life story is in chapter 19 is because I have so much respect and gratitude for him. That one of the best ways that you can actually respect a teacher is to learn and practice their teachings. The Buddha was actually asked during his lifetime, how could people respect him once he dies? And he said the best thing people could do is learn and practice the teachings. So that's what I did at the very first part of this group learning program and at the very beginning of the book, is I've been sharing with you the teachings of Gotama Buddha, because that's the very best way to respect a teacher, is to actually learn and practice the teachings. And that's what's going to produce the transformation in your mind and in your life, is by learning and practicing the teachings and integrating them into your day-to-day life. But it does help to understand the life story of Gotama Buddha, because as I mentioned, there's certain things that he learned along his journey that's going to help you in your journey to enlightenment. So I've organized this talk in these sections, and we're going to talk about his birth, his early life, his journey to enlightenment, and then his teaching career. And then we're going to really focus in on sickness, aging, and death, because these tend to be three challenging times in your own life when you're experiencing sickness, aging, and death, or when the people around you are experiencing this, like your parents or your life partner or your children or your siblings. If they're experiencing sickness, aging, and death, this can be really challenging for you. So I'm going to share some details here that are actually help you to be able to understand these times in your life and how to overcome them. Now, as you guys know, normally I open up to questions as I go throughout the class, where I'm teaching 15-20 minutes and then opening up to questions. But the best way to teach this topic is just to teach the entire life story of the Buddha and then open up to any questions that you guys have at the end. If you guys have questions, you'll be able to put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand electronically in Zoom and open up your mic and then ask any and all questions that you like. So I'm going to help you to understand the Buddha's life story in an effort to help you understand this individual and help you in your journey to this enlightened mental state. So the individual that we refer to as the Buddha or Gotama Buddha, he was born into a royal family. His mother was the queen. His name at his birth was Siddhartha Gotama. That was his given name. And when he was born into this royal family, the way that it worked is that if you were actually pregnant as a woman 2,500 years ago and you were living with your husband, then they would take you back to your homeland in order to give birth. So Siddhartha Gautama's mother, who was living with her husband, who was the king, she needed to deliver the baby, and they knew that it was about to come, so they organized a caravan and they were taking her back to her homeland where she could deliver the baby, because this way her parents and her siblings and other people around her could help her as she was first, a mother and having this first baby that was brought into her life. So as she was on the way back to her homeland in this caravan, she went into labor pains, and they stopped the caravan. She got out of the caravan and she goes over to a tree, and she's holding onto the branch of a tree trying to deliver the baby, because the baby was having difficulties coming out of the normal birthing canal. So standing up could have potentially helped this. Well, as was happening, the baby couldn't come out of the normal birthing canal, and it ends up breaking through the side of the stomach. And his mother ends up dying 7 days later because of this. Because 2,500 years ago, we didn't have the technology to save her life, which we would have just done a C-section nowadays. But she does end up dying 7 days after his birth. And for a woman to die during childbirth wasn't necessarily uncommon 2,500 years ago. And sometimes even the children would die as well. So they had protocols in place that when these things occurred, if the mother died and the child was alive, that your siblings would adopt your children as their own. So Siddhartha Gautama's mother, the queen, had an older sister who adopted Siddhartha Gautama as her own child. So his aunt became his stepmother. And during his birth, it's said in the original text of the Pali Canon that he walked 7 steps, lotus flowers were blossoming under his feet, and he spoke and he said, "This will be my last birth." I don't think that this part of the story is actually true, because the way that these things kind of work is oftentimes when somebody has done something as miraculous as the Buddha, as time goes on and stories are handed down, sometimes they're embellished upon in order to make this individual look even better than they already are. There's no need to embellish the story of a Buddha. They've already done something very amazing throughout their life, so there's no need to actually embellish their story. But nonetheless, this could be an embellishment of the story. I wasn't there, so I don't know, but if that part of the story is true, the next part of the story wouldn't actually be needed. So that's why I think that this part of the story probably is not true. So that after his birth, his father was interested in understanding what his son was going to become. This was a common practice for rich and noble people, that they would essentially pay fortune tellers to come and advise them of what their child was going to become. So Siddhartha Gautama's father, the king, summons 108 advisors to come and let him know what his son was going to become during his lifetime. And 107 of those advisors explained to the king that his son's going to be this great monarch and this great ruler, that he's going to rule over his territory and expand his kingdom far and wide. And of course, his father really liked that news, and he was like, yeah, that's my boy, right? And then there's this last advisor who comes in, the 108th one, and they apologize to the king, and they say, "Sir, I'm so sorry. I overheard the other advisors, and they're 100% correct. Your son is going to be a great leader, but not in the way that you think. He's going to be a spiritual leader. And his father didn't like this. So his father was interested in the son becoming a monarch and a king, an heir to the throne, and expanding his territory. So he ends up deciding that he's going to keep his son in the palace and never let him go outside during his life, because then he would kind of get involved in worldly affairs and what was going on in the kingdom, and maybe he would be interested to be a spiritual leader. But he thought that if he could woo him into the ways of being a monarch by kind of spoiling him with lavish gifts and things like this, that he would never be able to get that lifestyle any other way, and that he would just stay as a king. So he lavishes him with all the royal riches that you can imagine and all the things that royal riches could actually buy. He had wonderful fabrics for his clothing. He had wonderful entertainment and food, beautiful women bathing him and taking care of him. All of these things were done all throughout his life as he was being sequestered in the palace. So over 29 years, he was experiencing this in the palace, having all this luxury given to him as part of his life in living in the palace. So at the age of 29, he realizes that he's about to become the king, because during this time frame, you would become the king at the age of 30, and your dad would just retire, and they would be there alongside of you to help you learn how to be a better and better king. So at the age of 29, realizing that he was about to become the king, and he's never been outside the palace, he thought, like, how could I rule over these people if he doesn't even know what their life is like? So against his father's wishes and without his knowledge, he went outside the palace and he took with him his royal attendant. This was like his chief of staff, his main confidant, so to speak. And when he went outside to the kingdom, he had what is called the 4 observations. This is what actually motivated him on his journey to enlightenment. He saw a sickly person, an aging person, a dead corpse, and he saw a roaming ascetic, someone who's given up worldly life in order to be able to pursue this path to enlightenment. That's not the way you have to pursue the path to enlightenment, but some people end up doing it that way. So he sees this sickly person, and he sees this disgruntledness and agitation and frustration around this person, and he needs to turn to his royal attendant and ask what's going on over there, because this is all new to him. He lived this life of luxury, so he never saw this kind of disgruntledness and this agitation and frustration around someone who was necessarily sick like this. And he had to ask his royal attendant what was going on, because his father sheltered him from all of these things. And his royal attendant was like, oh, that person is going to have difficulties to sustain their life because they can't work and they're sick and they're ill and they're not going to have the basic necessities that they need in order to sustain their life. And this was mind-blowing to Siddhartha Gotama, because his life was this life of luxury. And if you grew up for 29 years in that way, you would probably think everybody lives that way. But he saw this individual wasn't living in that way. Then he saw an aging person, someone who's becoming older and decrepit and having difficulties to get around in the world. And once again, he had to ask his royal attendant, like, what was going on over there? And it was essentially the same story, that this person was disgruntled and agitated because they wouldn't be able to sustain their life so easily and take care of themselves. And he ends up seeing the 3rd observation, which is a dead corpse. And he sees the family grieving and being sorrowful because of their family member dying. And now Siddhartha Gautama needs to ask his royal attendant, like, what's going on over there? And it's essentially the same story, that this individual had died and now they wouldn't be able to help to provide basic necessities for the family, and the family is going to really struggle without this person in their household. So Siddhartha Gautama then saw this roaming ascetic, someone who has given up worldly life in order to train their mind and be able to understand this sickness, aging, and death in this path to enlightenment. And he had to ask his royal attendant what was going on with that individual, because he just sees this person, meditating and doing things like that. And his royal attendant explains that this person's trying to figure out the sickness, aging, and death. And Siddhartha Gautama decides that's what he would like to do, because the way that he looked at it is the kingdom was full of misery and despair, and he wasn't interested in ruling over this misery and despair. So he goes back to the royal palace and he decides he's going to leave that night in order to go off on this journey to enlightenment. Because he went back at nighttime, his wife and his young infant son was actually sleeping, because he was married at the time and had this newborn child. And he decides that he's going to leave in the middle of the night rather than wake them up and disturb them. And he didn't understand a whole lot about the mind at that point, but he understood enough that if he said goodbye, kind of woke them up and hugged them and kissed them, that it would be too difficult to leave out of the royal palace. So instead of doing that, he just kind of leaves in the middle of the night. And he takes with him his favorite horse and his royal attendant. And eventually, as he's leaving the royal palace, he gets to a point where on his journey, he decides to let his horse go and let his royal attendant go. And then he cuts off his hair. He has this long, beautiful, flowing hair. This is what the royalty would do during that time frame, is that they would grow their hair really long. And this is how people would know that you were a member of the royal family. Because if you went out in the kingdom and you had this long, beautiful, flowing hair, they knew that, you must have money, you must have servants, you don't have to do very hard, laborious work. So they have time to sit around and have their servants shampoo their hair, detangle their hair, brush their hair, comb their hair, and things like this. So anybody going out into the kingdom with this long, beautiful, flowing hair, they would know you're a member of the royal family. Where today, if you live in a kingdom, they probably put pictures of the king and the queen and other members of the royal family all over the kingdom, and this is how you know who's a member of the royal family. Today, we have that technology where 2,500 years ago, they didn't have that technology. Siddhartha Gautama was born in 563 BC. So this was a really long time ago before any of that technology was invented. So cutting off his hair would be like, I'm never going back, because nobody would ever think that he was actually the king, because he didn't have this long, beautiful, flowing hair that he would have been growing for 29 years. So it would be next to impossible for him to assume the throne and now become the king. So cutting off his hair is like, I'm never going back. And he goes to study with these two individual teachers because he was interested in training his mind and getting to enlightenment. And there were individuals in the community that were claiming that they knew how to get to enlightenment. So he studies with this first teacher, and this first teacher is teaching him to hang himself upside down from trees, lay on beds of nails, pierce his body with metal implements, starve himself, essentially disparaging the body and causing physical pain to the body. And the thought was that if you could overcome that physical pain, that then you would experience enlightenment. So he does this for a good year. And the teacher comes to him and explains to him that he's mastered his teachings, and that now if he would like to share his teachings as a teacher, he's more than welcome to do that. But Siddhartha Gautama realized his mind wasn't any more peaceful, having trained his mind under this teacher for an entire year, as it was when he was in the palace. So he decides to leave from that teacher and go seek out another teacher. And this other teacher was now teaching him essentially the same things. Hanging himself upside down from trees, laying on beds of nails, starving himself, things of this nature. And this individual trained him for an entire year, and he gets to the end of that year, and again the teacher says, you're a master of my teachings, you've mastered everything I have to teach you. But Siddhartha Gautama realized his mind wasn't peaceful, it wasn't joyful, so he knows he hasn't gotten to enlightenment, and he feels like he's kind of wasted 2 years of his life, and he's frustrated with the whole thing, so he goes off on his own into the forest. And when he goes off to the forest, the only things that he knows how to do are the same things that was taught to him by these two individual teachers. So he continues to do these things, and he takes it to a really far extreme, that he eats 1 grain of rice per day. And this is what he was thinking was going to help him to get to enlightenment. And he's doing this for such a long period of time that he was basically skin and bones. He was sitting on the edge of the forest, he was meditating, and his bones were protruding, like his facial bones, his ribs, and things like this. You might have seen artwork that depicts him during this period of time. And there's this mother and this daughter that comes by, and they see that he's about to die, and they beg and plead with him to eat some rice. And he has this revelation, this realization in this moment that if he allowed the physical body to die, he wouldn't actually be able to train the mind to get to enlightenment. So he decides that he's going to now eat in moderation, and he starts to find this middle way, where he realizes that when he's in the palace, he was living this life of sensual pleasures, and he had everything and anything you could imagine at his fingertips. But then when he left the royal palace, he swung all the way to the other side where he was eating 1 grain of rice per day. And he realizes that neither of these two methods are actually going to lead to enlightenment. So he starts to understand this middle way and this moderation of gradually making his way towards enlightenment through practicing this middle way. And over the next 4 years, he figures out how to get to enlightenment by himself without the help of any teachers or any guides. And he knows that he's enlightened because his mind's peaceful, it's joyful, it's no longer experiencing any discontent feelings. All the anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy, all these feelings in others are eliminated from the mind. There isn't even the slightest displeasure in the mind. So he knows that he's figured out how to get to enlightenment, but he also knows that his teachings are radically different than what was being taught at the time. Because at the time, they were disparaging the physical body, hanging themselves upside down from trees and things like this. And his teachings had nothing to do with that. It was all about training the mind. So he wasn't quite sure whether to share his teachings with others or to go back to the royal palace. So he stays at this tree in northeast India, what we refer to as northeast India. He was born in Nepal, and all of his life he was pretty much around northeast India. And he hangs out at this tree and he contemplates whether or not he's going to share these teachings with others. And after the 7-week time frame, he ultimately decides he would like to share the teachings rather than go back to the royal palace. So he ends up going back towards the area where he was with those first 2 teachers. And when he goes back to that area, he encounters 4 of his previous classmates and 1 of his previous teachers. And they start laughing at him and joking him and mocking him because they thought he had given up on the path to enlightenment. Because to them, in order to get to enlightenment, you needed to be disparaging the physical body, that you would essentially be starving yourself and hanging yourself upside down from trees and things like this. But here they see this bright, radiant, joyful, healthy individual coming down, and they were like, laughing at him and joking and mocking him because they thought he had given up on the journey to enlightenment. But in fact, he had actually gotten to enlightenment and they just didn't understand that. So he comes over to where they're at. He sits down on the ground and he takes his hand and he touches the earth. And this is where he performs the one and only miracle during his lifetime, where all these animals come to where he's at. There's like deer and squirrels and rabbits and birds and lizards and snakes, and all these animals come to where he's at. And it gets the attention of these 5 people, and they sit down and listen to what he has to say. And he delivers his very first teaching, which is the 4 Noble Truths. This is the very first teaching that you need to be able to get on the path to enlightenment. Because in a way that you can independently verify, you can learn what is the problem in your mind, the cause of the problem, the elimination of it, and the path forward. And it's important to learn with the original words of the Buddha so that you know what it is that the Buddha actually taught during his lifetime. Because you can have this breakthrough to understanding what's causing these discontent feelings so that then you can eliminate it. And when the Buddha taught it, that his students, those 5 individual people, could tell that he had gotten to enlightenment because they were able to independently verify what he had to say. A Buddha's teachings are independently verifiable. They're not based in belief. So you're not believing a bunch of things and then hoping something good happens when you die, but instead you're gaining wisdom about how the mind functions, you're gaining wisdom about the world around you, and this can all be independently verified. And as these individuals did that through the discourse that the Buddha shared, they could tell he had figured it out and he had gotten to enlightenment. So these are the first 5 students that he teaches, and from that point forward, his community just grows and grows and grows and grows. He got to enlightenment at the age of 35, and he ends up teaching for 45 years, dying at the age of 80. And there were countless people who got to enlightenment during his lifetime. And when he dies, they end up preserving the teachings so that other people can learn them and practice them and actually get to enlightenment as well after his death. And these are the 3 criteria of what makes a Buddha, is that they get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They then dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings, and countless people will get to enlightenment during that person's lifetime. Then they will preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people will get to enlightenment after their death. And this is how you know that an individual is a Buddha. And the last Buddha that the world is currently aware of is Gotama Buddha, the Buddha. He lived over 2,500 years ago, born in 563 BCE, and he died in 483 BCE. And there hasn't been another Buddha that the world is currently aware of since his lifetime. And it's very rare for a Buddha to come into the world. So you can get to enlightenment, but you won't actually be a Buddha at that point. You're going to need teachers and guides to help you, where you're doing the work, but a teacher or a guide is pointing out the things that you need to learn and understand to be able to get to enlightenment. So as he dies, his teachings are preserved, and now for the last 2,500 years, people have been learning and growing and developing, experiencing enlightenment, and now we can learn and practice his teachings and actually get to enlightenment. So during his lifetime, those 4 observations that motivated him to go on this journey to enlightenment was sickness, aging, death, and then of course the roaming ascetic. And what he ultimately discovers during his journey to enlightenment, among other things, is that the reason why people suffer and have such grief and sorrow during times of sickness is that the mind is craving permanence, that it's craving permanent health. And if you're craving permanent health, when you experience sickness of the body, then you'll experience frustration or agitation or some other painful feeling, because this body is impermanent. This body is not permanent. So the universal truth of impermanence tells us that everything around us is impermanent. It's constantly changing. But the mind in the unenlightened state craves permanence, and it wants this body to be permanent. So when it experiences sickness, the mind will experience anger and frustration because it has this longing, yearning for permanence, this desire, this expectation. And the same thing's occurring when an individual experiences aging. If somebody's disgruntled or agitated or frustrated, it's because the mind is craving permanent youthfulness, when in reality, this body is impermanent. You can't experience permanent youthfulness. And then when you get close to death, if you're craving permanent life and wanting to exist in this world permanently, then death will be very painful for you because you're holding on to this world, wanting to be permanently in this world, when in reality, this being is going to die. Because there was birth, there's going to be sickness, aging, and death. Then there's going to be sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. But you can eliminate all of this by training the mind to eliminate its cravings, desires, attachments, and now you will no longer experience that sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. You're still going to experience sickness, aging, and death as part of this life, but you won't be discontent because of it. Your mind will be completely peaceful and joyful, despite the fact that there's sickness, aging, and death. So the Buddha ultimately discovers how to help people out of this discontentedness, this suffering, this grief and despair, this displeasure of life, that you can ultimately get to a point where the mind is completely peaceful. The Buddha does end up coming back to where his family was. So his wife ends up ordaining with him, his son, his stepmother, cousins and brother-in-laws and people like this. There were many people coming to him in order to learn and grow and develop because they could tell that he had actually gotten to enlightenment. So this is everything that I have to share, but if you guys would like to go in deeper depth about any aspect of the life story of the Buddha or any other aspect of things that I was discussing today, you're more than welcome to ask those questions. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comments section, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any and all questions that you like. Just let me know what it is that you would like to ask questions about. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions. So what I'm going to do is share this with you here at the end of our class. This is something that I share with students because oftentimes when you're learning the life story of the Buddha, you might just be getting on the path to enlightenment, because no one ever said life would be easy, but it's also not supposed to be tough. Learning Gotama Buddha's teachings is not easy, but learning and practicing the teachings of the Buddha will ensure that life is not tough. Because oftentimes in the unenlightened state, you experience certain struggles and difficulties along the way. And what I'm here to share with you is that you can escape all of this. Life isn't supposed to be easy. Nobody ever said that it was supposed to be easy, but it's not supposed to be tough either. But you can learn and practice, and you can escape all of this struggles and difficulties. Life doesn't have to be a struggle. It doesn't have to be difficult. The only reason why an individual is experiencing that is because they haven't cultivated the wisdom about the natural laws that the Buddha taught about. So this path to enlightenment and learning the teachings of the Buddha, it's not easy, but it's also not difficult either. And by learning and practicing his teachings, it will ensure that life is not tough. Because who wants to live with anger and sadness and grief and guilt and shame and fear for the rest of their life? You don't have to experience this. You don't need to experience stress and anxiety. You can opt out of all of this. But you need to be able to decide that you're done with all of that and you're interested in learning and growing and developing on the path to enlightenment. Now, this path to enlightenment, it's not a 1 day thing, a 1 week thing, a 1 month thing, or even a 1 year thing. It's going to take you time to gradually train your mind, but you'll see gradual progress along the way. It's not like you work for 5 or 10 years and then you just miraculously, like a light switch, you're enlightened. That's one of the biggest myths about the life story of the Buddha. As you heard through his story, it's gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress that leads to enlightenment. It's not a light switch that's either on or off. It's not instantaneous. I've had some students that have been studying with me in various courses, and I've heard people say as in short as 2 days, they notice some improvement to the condition of their mind and what they were experiencing in day-to-day life. But it's going to take some time to ultimately get to enlightenment. You're going to need that gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. And you see this to be true about all aspects of your life, whether it's learning to read, write, and speak English, or some job or occupation that you have. It's been gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress that has led to improvement in your day-to-day life. So this path to enlightenment is the same way. But all the resources to be able to help you are available to you at no cost. You can get them from our website. You can download these things. You can access videos and podcasts and books, classes, courses, and retreats are live streamed and recorded. You can reach out for personal guidance because you can schedule appointments and I'll help you online. Or if you're here in Chiang Mai or any other city that I'm in, we can sit down and we can talk personally, and I can help you to understand these teachings. And it's going to take gradual training for you to gradually develop the wisdom that you need to awaken to enlightenment. And that's what it means to awaken, is to cultivate wisdom. There's no belief here that you're learning, you're reflecting, and you're practicing to be able to discover the truth. And that's what's going to help you to be able to overcome the struggles and difficulties of life. Because when you're having struggles and difficulties, it's just because there's certain wisdom that the mind is lacking. When you lack wisdom of the natural laws that the Buddha taught, you'll struggle and you'll have difficulties. But you can overcome that through the cultivation of wisdom. So I'll just end by thanking all of you guys for joining. Thank you for being interested to learn and practice the teachings of the Buddha. We have more in this group learning program. We've got about another 2 months to kind of end off this group learning program, and I'm going to be restarting it from the very beginning at the beginning of June. Next week in our class on Sunday, I'm going to be in chapter 20 of our book. Chapter 20 is all about this evolution of our consciousness from animal to human, helping you to be able to see how the mind in the human state oftentimes is coming out of the animal realm, and you can see these various qualities that an individual is experiencing in the unenlightened state, which is very similar to an animal. And one of the things that you're doing on the path to enlightenment is you're essentially becoming a better and better human being. You're shedding all these animalistic instincts that we've had from the time that we were in the animal realm, and you're becoming this better and better human being by progressing on the path to enlightenment. So understanding this evolution of our consciousness from animal to human, it can help you to see the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis in order to be able to make your way to enlightenment as you're shedding these animalistic instincts. So for example, like an unenlightened human being will typically growl and roar, right, through our unskillful conduct, through our intention, speech, and actions, trying to fear other beings into doing things our way. This is an animalistic instinct that can be shed. But if you don't understand that that's part of what you're doing, then maybe you just meditate and that's it. You don't realize that you need to improve your moral conduct too in the way that you interact in the world. So I'm going to be sharing with you this evolution of our consciousness from animal to human so that you can understand this, and then it'll help you in your journey to enlightenment. So as you guys know, if you have any questions at any time, you can always post those in our Facebook group. You can ask in our live classes. You can send me a private message, or you can schedule personal guidance, and I'll be pleased to help you guys. So whatever you choose to do today, have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Perhaps I'll see you on Sunday next week, or maybe Wednesday in our meditation class, where I'll be guiding you in meditation and then opening up to questions. So be well and have a lovely rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Sawadee ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.